phenomenal pizza, a massive salad bar there. We had all kinds of soft drinks, dessert buffet line. It was incredible. How's your bologna sandwich at home? We missed you being here today, but we're glad you're here. This is going to take us for a few moments, and we're going to talk a little bit about the congregational survey, and if we can get the back screen, that would be incredible, so I can see where I am. I want to say thanks to Nate and Noah for helping us, and it's just great. The opportunity to spend a few moments together this afternoon, and we'll honor your time, is to give you the results of the congregational survey. Noah, you just kind of have to follow me here a little bit because I don't have my script. So if you will notice on the screen, there is a picture of a booklet that looks just like this. This is the comprehensive report of all that was shared inside of the congregational survey. If you filled a survey out, and 27 of you did, if you filled a survey out and you gave specific information, all of it, every bit of it, is included in this book. This is a book for the board so that they would have a chance to review everything. Nothing that was shared was omitted from this report. The next page of the booklet itself is actually the table of contents, and it has all the information related to the 5 questions that were asked. And I'll walk through those as we get into this a little further. I would also say that your voice matters. Your voice matters. It matters for several reasons. One is, in the olden days, a pastoral search was done really inside of a room with a board, and the congregation had very little input or very little awareness of what was going on in that process. But your voice matters, and if you'll remember, you completed the survey, and you'll have a chance a little bit later in this time together to ask questions or to make observations. And eventually, at the conclusion of our time together, we're going to share a profile, a pastoral profile your church board has completed, which will guide us in our search. And we're going to share that with you. You'll be able to take a copy home. Those of you that are watching online, it's going to drop into your mailbox at the conclusion of this meeting, and you'll be able to see it. And those of you that are gathered here today will be able to suggest names based on the profile. Those that are watching can suggest names in a variety of ways, and we'll do it this Sunday and next Sunday. So there'll be an opportunity for all of us to participate. I want to talk about 4D thinking. 4D thinking is a way to think about how we go about the task of looking at the survey. And so you're going to see a pie with 4 shapes in it. And inside this pie, there are 4 responses that I have encountered as I have done this congregational survey with many, many churches. The first is there will be people that will discredit the survey. They will say that wrong questions were asked. Some will dismiss the results, and they will say things like, well, that result and that statement, that's just not true. Some will discuss the reasons why. They'll say, well, I know why that was said, and here's why it was said. But the reality is, unless you said it, you don't know why it was said. The last piece will be decide to act. Your church board has decided to act, and it's because of their decision to act that we are gathered here in this place for this afternoon's conversation. Let me move on and share with you a couple of what I would consider to be premises. And these premises are helping us to understand how this particular report works. So if you look, you'll see a slide that says on the left-hand side, premises, and beside that slide, you'll see this statement. And it's a pretty basic statement, but every statement in the survey is true for someone. It may not be true for you, but it is true for someone. And it is wrong for us to denigrate that response, because it doesn't match our response. Now, I'm not talking about absolute truth. I'm not talking about scriptural truth. I'm just talking about the responses to the questions. And so it's your truth and my truth. The next slide will get us moving along another premise, and the next premise is that every person has a confirmation bias. By that I mean that every single person in this room sees things from their perspective. For example, there's some that look at that and say, what? That is a 6. Some would say that is a 9. Okay, so I was doing this meeting not long ago, and there was a group of people that said, well, it's a 6. There's no question about that. How could it be anything else? And somebody said, well, it's a 9, and how can it be anything else? And a person spoke up and said, I don't know how to say this, but it's not either one of those. And I was really interested then. And here's what she said, that's the letter G. To which another person responded, who cares whether it's a 6, a 9, or a G? What's it doing on the floor? This is confirmation bias. You say, well, I don't think I have that. Well, let me just give you an example. Every one of us will go to the news channel, and the news channel that we watch confirms how we see the world. And my wife and I just got back yesterday from New York City, and we were in New York City, and we walked from the Today Show 2 blocks to the Fox and Friends show. Now, I'll just leave it right there. Okay? Another premise is every person is vulnerable to triangulation. Just hold this slide a minute. You say, I'm not sure what that is. Let me see if it sounds familiar when I tell it to you this way. You're a parent, mom and dad, and the 4-year-old comes to, don't get ahead of me, 4-year-old goes to dad, tries to weigh who's the best angle, and goes to mom and says, Mom, can I have a cookie before dinner? And what does mom say? No. What does the 4-year-old do? Goes, asks dad. What does dad say? Sure, why not? Yeah, bring me one too. This is triangulation. It is this sense of which sometimes it happens in marriage, it happens in our work world, it happens in the church. So let me give you a couple examples if you go to the next slide. You'll see a triangle, and there's several that fit in here, so let me just give them to you real quick. Go ahead, the next one, please. If you'll go to the very next one, there is what we would consider to be the triangulation that might occur between a church board, the congregation, and the district. And that is, there are people that will say, well, why is it taking so long? And so the congregation says that to a church board member. The church board member contacts me and says, we want to know why it's taking so long. Or a person on the board will say something to me about the congregation and will say something like this, next time you talk to the congregation, could you please say the following? And I don't do that because that's triangulation. Let me give you another example of triangulation, and this would be considered generational triangulation. This is the builders, the boomers, and the Generation X and Generation Z. And this is usually around the idea of some aspect of the life of a church. The one generation will say to the next generation, can you talk to the other generation about why we do it this way? It's just not being helpful to us. And instead of generations talking to each other, they go to the triangle, and they probably doesn't happen in this church, but it happens in other churches. Let's go to the next slide. I want to begin by looking at the actual results of the survey, and this is where it would be helpful for you to begin to think with the board. The question that was asked, the first question is, what do you consider to be Leonardtown Church of the Nazarene's 3 greatest strengths? This is the cumulative result of what you've said. Number 1, you said we are friendly, loving, and caring. Number 2, prayer is very important to us. And number 3, we are biblical and family oriented. Now, when I see these things, I immediately have some questions. One of the questions I have is based on my findings in churches is I have never, ever conducted a congregational survey that had anything other than this number one response: we're friendly, loving, and caring. But I will tell you, as I probe a little deeper and dig a little deeper into it, I find out that churches are friendly, loving, and caring to people that they know and that are like them. Doesn't mean they're friendly, loving, and caring to the average person coming off the street. I don't have enough information to know whether that is true of this church, but I do know that every church that we survey that's in looking for a pastor says we're friendly, loving, and caring. And I do know that there's some churches, they are maybe friendly and loving, but not caring, or maybe loving and caring, but not friendly, and certainly not always to everybody that walks through the door. Question number 2 in the results, and these are very quick. What do you consider to be Leonardtown Church of the Nazarene's 3 greatest needs? And here you will find 3 things that are very unique to you. Number 1, physical improvements to the building and to the property. Number 2, visitation and follow-up. And this is seen a little bit further in the results that indicate that there is a need for connection to people that either have become marginalized by their choice or maybe have drifted. There's a need to follow up. And number 3, the greatest need that you have indicated is the need for organization. And this is not to be interpreted as organizational things are disorganized, but there needs to be this deep sense that this is how we function together as a church. Question number 3, what are the top skills that are most needed by a lead pastor of this congregation? And this is where we begin to get some sense as to how we would structure a profile to begin the search to look for a pastor. You have indicated that number 1, your pastor has to have skills in the pulpit. That means they have to be able to clearly communicate the gospel and the scriptures in ways that are understandable. Number 2, the ability to inspire others to action. You have indicated that we're not looking for somebody that just can come in with flowery speech, entertain us, but somehow translate that into people being active. Number 3, your pastor has to have relational abilities. These are the top 3, and they'll be confirmed as we get a little further into the congregational survey. Just to be reminded, the first 3 questions were to rate number 1, number 2, number 3. But we shifted gears and we began to ask the question, what are the challenges that a new pastor may have to address? Now, I want you to pay real close attention here, because this is the cumulative work of all of you that have contributed. If you're a teacher, a school teacher, public school teacher, or you're in education, you will be familiar with what's known as a word cloud. A word cloud is for those of you that may not be familiar with that, you take a document and you feed it into a software program, and based on the frequency with which words appear in that narrative, it creates a picture of the main words, and the word that appears the most frequently is the largest. And so it then cascades down and the words become smaller, so that when you take a step back, it looks like a cloud, but as you zoom in, you'll see the frequency of words. The number 1 challenge that the new pastor may have to address is what I would consider ministry information. And go ahead to the slide, if you would. Ministry information, and that is, some of the comments was there's need to have ministries that will involve all people using their gifts and strengths to engage with God's leading. Another comment was the need to reestablish children's ministries. The congregation needs a better understanding of the different ministries the church has presently and how they might work together. and then more diverse offerings of ministries for people to find a place both to serve and to be served. The next part of this has to do with what would be considered volunteers and the need for an increased number of volunteers. And this church, like many churches, has the 20-80 principle going on, and that is 20% of the people do about 80% of the work. And how do we get new people to volunteer and to stop the burnout from ones that may be serving all the time? And how to get more members involved in church activities. And then this statement, I think, is very telling. Another issue that has been getting volunteers to be both committed and dedicated. And then ministry often has, in our congregation, a low priority for many people. And there is this disproportionate sense in the comments that there are people of the congregation that would like to have a wide variety of ministries offered, but are maybe reluctant to involve themselves, but they want the ministries that are being offered. The next slide is another issue. Go ahead if you'll change, that'd be helpful, is really the physical plant, the building itself. And there's several comments about the purchase of the building behind the church, and the need to remodel it and get it ready. Physical updates and assessments of needs in both this building and that. Somebody wrote this: as minor as it seems, our facility needs a lot of attention. I'm not telling you something that's all brand new, but one of the challenges is the age of the church building. It's in a need of tremendous amount of repair, and some work needs to be done on the parsonage. So the survey indicates that there is an awareness that there's going to have to be some work that's going to be done just to keep up with the building, the age of this one. The next slide talks about the issue of outreach. And there's a couple comments that I'll make here. We are doing some great outreach programs to help serve the community. How can we find more of these, and what needs to be done, and what are the needs? And maybe how can we partner with other churches? There is an awareness that you are engaged in outreach, but how might you streamline that? How might you involve more people in that? So this is in the area of outreach. The next slide is another issue, and that is the issue of unity. And I made note of this. We have such a divided country right now, with even more divided and polarizing political parties, and it affects the church. And how does differing political views play into the interpretation of Scripture, and what should the priorities of the church be in a time in which the political climate is so polarized? Another comment: our church is welcoming, but reflecting on how it might not be seen as welcoming for certain types of people. And then there's a list. Now, please understand, these are not all bad things. Unchecked, unresolved they can be, but being aware of them is really critical. The next slide is on the issue of vision, and that is, how do we honor the past, live in the present, but keep our eye on the future? Because the future is coming at us quickly. And there's a statement that's just got 5 words, and it speaks to this: a unified vision for the future. And as a pastor comes, she or he will have to face that. The next issue is the issue of communication. And somebody has said we need to know who's in charge of ministries and who the contact person is. I want to say thank you to the board for creating a one-page sheet that's who you're going to call. That's what I call it, who you're going to call. And it's there. And how does a church our size ensure regular and relevant communication to the congregation? How do we do that? Let me just tell you, as soon as you find out how to do that, let me know. I pastored 30 years, and we would have it on the screen, in the bulletin, announced from the front, and a handout as they go home, and somebody would say these words to me: I did not know that was happening. And see, inside, this is where my filter has to work really well. Because I want to say, are you sensory dull? That's what I would say something like that. Communication. Let me go to the next one, please. The next slide is a reminder of the issues of worship. This is an actual quote. It's not a challenge, but it is a need for us older people in the congregation. We grew up in a church singing all our beloved songs from our hymnal, and could there be more of that? And I will just indicate to you that the board is aware that an individual who completed the survey made a suggestion of songs that would fit some of what else was shared, along with the page numbers, so the church board is aware of that. But worship is a challenge in any congregation. I call it the three bears approach. You remember the story of the three bears? This porridge is way too hot. This porridge is way too cold. This porridge is just right. Unfortunately, there's not many of that. This is just right. Unless it's the way you like it and it's just right. Here's what I would say. Probably what reached me when I was not a Christ follower is not going to be effective to reach Christ followers today. And so the idea of worship has to be God exalting and has to lift people's hearts and spirits to engage in that worship. The next slide. Go one more if you would. Okay, hold it right there just for a moment. I'm going to come to that one. There are some additional comments that are in this early section, and these additional comments you can tell, are very unique to individuals, and so I don't know who said any of this, but somebody said, "I'm very new to this church, so I'm very excited for what the Lord will be doing." With COVID changing how things were done and church becoming virtual for a while, we gained more attendees who started watching, listening in, but many still didn't feel comfortable attending in person. Whether due to continued health or COVID concerns or not feeling like a real part of the church, or for other reasons, we need to reach out to those individuals and explore ways to help them feel comfortable returning. And then somebody, I love this one. The question was, what are some of the things to suggest? And somebody said, none at this time. I'm just praying for everybody involved. So I kind of circled that. I'm going to come back to that. Thank you for everybody. There was even a suggestion by several, even though this was not asked for, several surveys actually contained names of individuals that would be potential pastoral candidates. And my interpretation of that is these would be individuals of preference. However, when you see the the pastoral profile for the congregation, you may say, well, that individual doesn't fit. And so what we've intentionally done is waited until we distribute this pastoral profile for you to actually take a look at what we're looking for, and it will help you to know. This particular area is important because it's a picture of all different individuals. No, go back one more. This one right here. This is under pastoral profile information. You have said, get a pastor who's able to teach from Scripture about how it affects our everyday life. A person filled with the Spirit of God, one that loves God's Word, and a passion for those that are lost or seeking the Lord. Leadership needs to be able to attract younger followers. And so your next pastor is going to have their work cut out for them as they begin to think about this. Under the challenges that we face, let me go to the next slide, challenges that we face, the reality is somebody had the courage to say, how do we replace somebody like Pastor Paul? And your board, and I know your pastor, your most recent pastor, there can be a sense of the process getting derailed if you're looking for Pastor Paul 2.0. What we're looking for is God's leader for this next chapter in the life of your church. We know God controls. One of the reasons Pastor Paul was so successful with building up the church was his humility and ability to relate to people. He was educated, a natural teacher, but did it with humility. And I'll throw this one in. It says his wife is an angel, which also helps. I don't know if she wrote that or... Yeah. Teresa, if you are watching, I'm just reading what's written. And then this last comment under this section, and it's funny. So here's the sentence, trusting our board to handle it. And we had a discussion in the board meeting as to how that was read. Some people read it like, we are trusting our board to handle it. And some read it this way, well, we trust they can handle it. I tend to read it the first way. And you've got a great, great, great board. The next slide, and we're going to kind of move quickly, is we want to take a moment to give you the opportunity to ask any questions that you may have, or any kind of comment that you want to make. And while you're thinking about that, I want to make 3 quick observations that are the result of my experience in dealing with congregations that are faced with identifying and calling a pastor. The first comment is your church is of a size, and this church is situated in a specific location. And it is easy to be susceptible and vulnerable to living in the shadow of what they call a larger steeple. My wife and I pastored in Flint, Michigan, a town of 100,000 people with 9, count them, 9 Nazarene churches. Our church ran about 250, but we lived in the shadow of Flint Central Church of the Nazarene that ran 1,500. But Swartz Creek, that was a suburb of Flint, lived in the shadow of West Flint. We ran 250. They ran about 25. And when you are in a church the size of yours, living in the shadow of a steeple of a larger church, maybe it's a non-denominational, maybe it's a denominational church, you are faced with the constant pressure of trying to keep up with that. And here's the spoiler alert, you never will. But you will have people that will leave because they are program driven and they'll go somewhere else. As a pastor, I had that happen on a regular basis. We could not compete with a church running 1,500. A youth group the size of our congregation, okay? A choir larger than our 3 Sunday school classes put together. So that's number one. Number two, your church is faced with a history that indicates that there is reason to be optimistic about the future because you have experienced strong days of ministry. But those strong days of ministry have been impacted by COVID. And COVID, I don't know, I probably should tell you this, you're the only community in America, the only church in America that was affected by COVID. So let me just take you off the hook. It's just your church, nowhere else. No, all of us did. But it has impacted every church. And to return from what you were to where you are now, if you are in the 40 to 60% range of people returning, you're doing pretty well. So that's something to be thinking about. Thirdly, I think it's important for you to understand that there are events in the life cycle of every church that do one of two things. They strengthen the vibrancy of a church, or they can rob the church of vibrancy. Since it's just us here today, your church has experienced both of those in its history. And sometimes it can be the elephant in the room, and it needs to be named, whatever it is. Let them know we'll be done in about 15 minutes. But it's the kind of event that can really cause the church to wobble. And it can be the kind of event that causes the church to soar. And so those three statements, living in the shadow of the steeple, impact of COVID, and things in the life cycle of a church that cause those kinds of things to place a church where it is. Couple all three of those with a vacancy in pastoral leadership, and it is easy to find people that drift away from the church in search of another kind of ministry that may be more tailored to what they want. Here's what I know, and I'm speaking from experience. We had a church of about 300, and we ran out of people that could lead the choir and play the instruments for the choir. And on a Sunday, 40 people from our church walked out. And they went to Flint Central, and Flint Central's church choir expanded by 40. And when they left, I was told, Pastor, there goes all the money. The next year, the income shot straight up, only to discover the people that were leaving were only there because of this ministry. Hear me carefully. If you are in a church and you leave to go somewhere else for a ministry, when that ministry runs out, you'll go somewhere else. Amen. I'm just saying to us in this moment, for this church to take the next step, you're going to have to stick together. And some of you are going to have to get off your seat and get on your feet. And some of you are going to have to do some things maybe that you haven't done before. But it's going to take all of us. Here's the good news. Diane and I are going to get in the car and we're driving home.
Could be a lot closer.
I was in a board meeting. I know. I was in a board meeting the other night, and somebody said, "Would you be our pastor?" And a person spoke up and said, "There's no way we would have him as our pastor." Now, there's an endorsement right there. The filter came off, and I thought to myself, and it's because of you that I would not be your pastor. Questions or comments that you have. And I want you to, you'll have to come to the microphone, and so we can all hear you so that they can hear you on the live feed as well. Okay? Any questions or comments? You say, well, I can be heard from here, but our people can't hear you that are joining us online. The easiest what? I'm telling you, this is great. This is great. Anything? What I will do is invariably, there's questions you have, and Diane and I will stay around. And if you have a question you personally want to ask me, I'll take a moment to do that as well. Noah, I want to go. Can you go to the next slide? I'm trying to see what I've got down here. Okay. This is the one I want to talk to you about. We'll kind of wrap up with this. I want you to think with me for a few moments about considering the story. The story is the story of Jesus. Considering the story. And how the story will be communicated in this context. I want you to think of three circles. The first circle at the top is the church story. What is the story of Leonardtown Church of the Nazarene from its inception? What is the church's story? And every church has two types of stories. Number one, they have what's known as parlor stories, kitchen stories. You with me? Parlor stories are stories that everybody knows. Somebody comes over to your house, they're sitting in your parlor, your living room, and you're telling stories, and everybody's laughing. But you go into the kitchen, and there's a whole different set of stories. In many respects, that's the real story. But you don't tell those kind of stories to people right out of the gate. You kind of have to. But Leonardtown has parlor stories and kitchen stories. This church has a story. Secondly, this community has a story. This zip code has a story that is unique and is unlike any story anywhere else on the Mid-Atlantic District. This is a unique story. But I would also tell you that Petersburg, Pennsylvania has a unique story. Crossroads Church of the Nazarene, Ellicott City, a unique story. Then you think about a lead pastor's story, her story or his story. Now, what you're looking for as you begin the process of thinking about calling a pastor is the clear articulation of all of these stories so that where they mesh right in that middle, that's the place where we're trying to determine how we might find a leader whose story matches your story as a church, your community story. Now you say, well, that means we have to have somebody that was born and raised here, or it might mean somebody that's transplanted here, but that's not true. That's not true. My wife and I went to Flint, Michigan, and when we received a call to go there, I had no idea where Flint, Michigan was. I had never seen Michael Moore, a movie about General Motors. I had never seen any of that. I did not know where any of that was. But in going there, it quickly became our story. And we quickly began to realize these are our people. And so it's not just necessarily familiarity with the individuals, but it is focus on the type of individual that we will look for. So as the board has worked through this, and they've seen this, and they're working on this, how do we begin that process? Go to the next slide, if you would. I'm going to have, Diane, can you help me real quick? And maybe if you could help me, we'll pass these out. This is a copy of the pastoral profile that your church board has completed and has unanimously adopted, that is the result of taking into consideration all that you have said in this survey. And so the congregational survey has been completely reviewed, and your church board created this profile. This is what's going to guide our search. Now, I must tell you that I was not involved in putting this together. Your church board did this work, and they forwarded it to me. We met as a church board, and in meeting together as a church board, there were very few changes that were made, and the changes that were made were just taking one sentence out that really was a repetition of what had already been stated. So let me just take a moment. The first paragraph is really about the circle that deals with the story of the community. You're looking for a pastor who has strong skills in the pulpit, and what they mean by that is that it's a gospel-centered, biblically sound message and preaching, non-political, non-divisive, relatable, invitational, charismatic, good sense of humor. These are skills in the pulpit. Number two, your pastor needs to be a bridge builder, available, accessible, approachable, skilled in conflict resolution, bridging the gap between those that are watching online and those that are present, invested in the community, making visitations and following up. Thirdly, a pastor that is able to cast vision, future-focused vision for the use and care of the facilities to best serve the congregation and make it available to the community, adding structure and consistency to ministries, engaging and energizing the congregation to carry the mission and vision forward in a tangible way within our community, our congregation. Leadership development, discipleship, and identifying, inviting, encouraging, and cultivating leaders. This is back to the importance of asking and engaging leadership to be a part of the mission. And then lastly is communication, and our communicator and organizer. This is the sense that there is work to be done to create structures that will help the church not be restricted, but give focus to the ministry of the church in both the building itself, but also in the community where God has planted this particular church. And so this becomes really the opportunity to look. Now, the board said, well, sounds like that's a description for Jesus. And we would probably not be able to find all of these things. Is it possible to find all of these things? And the answer is no, not in one person. But what you are looking for, in addition to having this as a pastoral profile, this needs to be a profile of you as a congregation, so that where there might be a gap in one of these, you fill that gap in. And where there's a gap in your leadership, your pastor fills that in. So to be focused on this being the person who's going to come in and save everything, you got the wrong idea. The pastor that you call, she or he, must be responsible to see that these are accomplished either through their personal ministry or through your ministry that's shared with others. Okay? So this becomes our map. Noah has already placed this on the bulletin board outside the door right here so that you'll be able to see where we are in the process. We're asking you to take this home with you. This will eventually find its way onto your website. This will eventually be seen by others who might be interested in serving as your pastor and would make an inquiry, maybe sensing their skills might match some of what you have listed here. The next slide is a slide that that will help you now to help us. And I'm gonna distribute these cards. Can you help me again, brother? Thank you so much, Diane. This is a 3x5 card, and what we are going to ask you to do is, if you have a name, a suggestion, a name that you think might fit this profile, I would encourage you to put that name down on that card. And I'm going to collect those cards and take them with me. And then we're going to keep this open next Sunday. And there might be people that are not here today, this Sunday, but would like to be a part of this next Sunday. And we would make this available. And Noah serves as our church board secretary. And I've asked her next Sunday, there'll be a box out there like there was for the congregational surveys, and you can just drop your card in there next Sunday. Please don't sign your name to the card, because if you sign your name, I'll think, well, maybe there's a pastoral candidate, and I don't think that we want to do that. But if you would make a suggestion, and I would also say that if you have a couple of suggestions, use a separate card, but please don't fill out 10 cards with the same name. That's not helpful to us. But just one name per person, or 2 names per person, but do not fill out multiple cards. We're not voting. We're not going to try to stuff the ballot box. We're trying to create a list of names that we believe closely match this profile. And I would also say that if you are watching online, you will see my email address, but you will also see a Google form, and you can respond even now at home through either sending that directly to me, to my email address, which is visible to those that are watching online. There's also a Google form that you can complete, and that form would then enable you to get your input in as well. So what we have done is I've tried to keep you up to date with the steps. That document is printed out there as well. We've asked you for your input on the congregational survey, and you've helped us with that. We've shared the input with you, and we've shared the profile with you. Now we're asking for your input of names, and you're saying, then what happens? Well, in about 2 or 3 weeks, I'll be back, and every name that is suggested, now there's names that are in the congregational survey that are not going to be added because that we were not asking for them at that time. We have them listed, but these are the names that we received today and next Sunday. And when I come back to meet with the board, I'll present every single name that was suggested today and next Sunday. My responsibility as a district superintendent is to review every name and vet every name, making certain that they are an ordained or they're in the credentialed process of receiving ordination, and bring a full report of each candidate and their qualifications. Excuse me. And that report will come to them, and then they will begin the process of reviewing resumes based on your suggestions and based on the suggestions of names of candidates that I have resumes for presently that might fit this, as well as the district staff and the general church. The general superintendents in the Church of the Nazarene are very well aware of Leonardtown Church of the Nazarene, and they may have a suggestion or two. Just a moment ago, I received a text from Dr. Gustavo Crocker, and he is our jurisdictional general superintendent, vitally involved in the fact that making it possible for Dr. McPherson to go to Maine. He's aware that there's an opening. It would not surprise me if he calls me and says, please add this name. So the list of names will not be restricted just to the congregation, but we'll take all the names, and when I bring the final report, the board will not know the origin of the names. They'll just see them alphabetically. And so you know I bring what's called a candidate comparison chart. It lists every candidate's present ministry assignment, married, children. It gives ministry experience, and we're able to compare every candidate equally across a platform that shares all that information. I probably have given you way more than what you wanted to have, but I want to make sure that you don't feel like we're just doing this in some secret room, that we are being very intentional to involve the voice of the congregation. Noah, as secretary, have I forgotten anything that we need to discuss based on our conversation in the board meeting? Okay. To our church board members, I've asked them not to ask any questions because they've had the opportunity. But I will say to you, as we move through this process, this will be a confidential process, and that is to protect the candidates, because we could lose a good candidate if it gets out that they're being considered and their church finds out. So it'll be confidential. You say, well, I'd like to know who and all of that. Well, that will not happen, but you will have the opportunity to meet the candidate and ask any questions of the potential candidate nominated by the church board. Okay? Anything else? Any other questions now that you've kind of sat through this? I apologize, you guys set these microphones up and we haven't used them.
How is it that you spell Bowser?
Yeah. He's not going to give up. Other questions? Okay. Are there questions coming in from our feed? Nothing back there, Nate? Okay. Let me tell one story about this congregational meeting that I conducted at another church, and then we'll be closed. I was at a church and we were having this meeting, and I had made reference to the fact that every statement is true for someone. I had made that statement. So their report was a few more pages than this one, and there was a board member that had sat through the entire presentation, had read everything in the book, and was sitting in the congregation while I was doing this meeting. And somehow I made a statement about what was said, and this board member stood up, and he wheeled around. He was sitting toward the front, and he wheeled around, and he said, "I would like to know who said that." And I thought, oh my gracious. No, seriously, I want to know who said that, because that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, and it's not true. I said, let me go over it one more time. It's true for someone. And this is how people get hurt and feel like they have not been heard. And so what I've said to you today, I don't want you to go home and say, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, because it might be a person that's your closest friend that wrote that. And I think what we need to say to one another is thank you for taking the time to complete the survey and share with us what you have thought, because it's helped us to create a stronger profile. Okay? A couple disclaimers, then we'll close. Some of you know the name Francis Chan. Okay? Yeah, Francis Chan. Probably about a third of the churches that I go to will put his name on the card. And let me just save you time. He's not coming to be your pastor. Okay? One more disclaimer. You may put a name on the card, and that name does not appear to be the final candidate. Don't take it personally. There are a number of reasons for that. And if there is a person who has pastored where they are for less than 2 years, I won't even consider them to come to be a pastor, because it's not fair to the church. You would be furious to get a great pastor and then 14 months later that pastor to go somewhere else. But I will reach out to individuals. Please don't lobby for an individual. And if the individual you suggested, their name does not appear, there's a reason for that. And please don't call them and ask them, because they may not even know you're the person that suggested them. And you might want to preserve your friendship with them, because they might say to you, what were you thinking? There's no way I would go there. And then you're the schmuck. So, all right. If there's nothing else, let me close, and then I'll be around for a few moments. If there's questions you'd like to ask personally, please feel free to do that. And if there's anything else, I'll be happy to chat with you. Father, thank you for this wonderful group of people and for their passion for you. May we live fully present in this moment, realizing that you've given us the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Be with us as we leave this place now, as we continue this prayerful deliberation, seeking the leader for Leonardtown. Be with us as we travel to our homes. Keep us safe, we pray. And we ask that you would bless us as we come back together. We pray this in your name. Amen. Amen. Lord bless you, and feel free to take these surveys, these profiles with you. God bless.